I welcome you to the Semaj MindSpa Radio, where mind, spirit, and science meet. Here on Fit FM, 96.7 FM, and fitfmja.com. Now, I want to thank our founding sponsor for the Semaj MindSpa Network, Jamaica National, the JN Group. We'll help you find a way. That's exactly what we do. So good evening. My name is Leahcim Semaj, and you are inside the Semaj MindSpa. As I say, where mind, spirit, and science meet. Just to remind you that the idea of the MindSpa network is just like a pebble being dropped in the lake of life, and it spreads out. A pebble. Ideas are just like pebbles. That's what we're doing. What do pebbles do? Create ripples that travels farther than anyone expects. And when it does that, it actually reshapes minds. Reshapes mind. And it also shapes moments and entire ways of seeing the world. These mental pebbles, small at first glance, but capable of doing incredible things. Capable of sending waves of clarity across the whole surface of your thinking. Awakening unstoppable personal evolution. These waves disturb stagnant water, breaking old patterns and setting new currents in motion. These waves, mental waves, simple acts that create profound shift. That's our aspiration, that's our intention, that is our desire as we interact with you. So we want to greet our immediate Trelawney family. Can't do without them. Then we extend the greeting to the North Coast, all along the North Coast around to Western Jamaica, that are immediately can contact us via Fit FM 96.7. Now, we also greet the world, because that's how you reach us on www.fitfmja.com. With a special shout out to the Wayne Hall Network coming out of Atlanta, who streams with us too. And then Caribbean Vibes Radio Network, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. So gently, step by step, piece by piece, connecting the world by the ripples of the ideas that we share. Now, topic tonight, the rise in school violence and what should be done. You ask a question, then we provide solutions, suggestions. So once again, good evening. That's it. My name is Leahcim Semaj, and at the MindSpa, we choose calm over chaos, clarity over noise, understanding over reaction. That's what we do here. Tonight, we take a topic that is disturbing many, confusing some, but quite frightening for all: the rise in school violence. Now, I want to begin with a simple shift. We keep asking, what's wrong with these children? Tonight, I want us to ask a different question. And work with me on this. So the question I want to ask tonight is, what are these children trying to tell us? What are they trying to tell us? Is bad them bad? Is mad them mad? Or are they trying to tell us something? Because see, what we're witnessing is not just violence. It is distress speaking loudly. As I say, I see the world as a psychologist. I try to understand the mental processes and the behaviors that are behind all the things that we see. So I want to make sense of it. All right? Now, let's see if we can frame the real problem, psychologically frame it. Let's go deeper. By the time the violence shows up in the classroom, in the schoolyard, on the road with these students, it's already the last stage of a long psychological process. This is something that's been brewing, has been building. What we're now seeing is the outcome of that evolution. A child doesn't wake up one morning and becomes violent. No. Just get up one morning and decide, boy, I'm go bad today. I'm go beat up people. It doesn't work that way. No. What happens? Stress builds up. Emotions overwhelm. But language fail. You see, many times, many of us, even as adults, we are emotionally illiterate. We experience emotions, but we don't have the language to express it. Not to mention the children. And in our case, I have been saying this for the last couple of months, that coming out of Melissa, the tension, the stress, the fears building up will take its toll. So what ultimately happens is that behavior takes over because we don't have language. Behavior becomes the communication. So when children lash out, they're not saying, I am bad. What they're actually saying with their behavior, with their action, is that I am overwhelmed. I feel unsafe. I don't know what to do with what I'm feeling. So it comes out behaviorally. Think about that. I'll explain it much further as we go further into this. And here is where we go wrong. We respond to the behavior, but we ignore the message that the children are trying to tell us. We respond to the behavior. And oftentimes the behavior, the reaction is harsh. And understandably so as to why we do this. Because we see it, it's embarrassing. One of the things that I've even noticed, that we've gone way past the whole issue of gender equality. We see as many of these videos with boys as we see them with girls. The dramatic thing, is that why does the fight go on so long? Huh? So many people around with cameras trying to capture the fight. I'm not even surprised that some are even driving it on, setting it on even further. But then ultimately, good sense prevail, and you see some people stepping in to pull the combatants apart. But oftentimes the damage is already done. In many instances, it is just fists, slaps, punches. But then there are times when it escalates. And there are times when even after it's broken up, there's a retaliatory component, and any number can play. So this is what we're seeing. And by the way, if you have other interpretation, I'd love to hear it. And you can share with me. You just send me a voice note, 876-383-5627. I'll incorporate it into future programs. So now, let me give you my explanation as a psychologist now, and I'm operating from inside the brain. What is happening with a child? Now, when a child is under constant stress, the amygdala, as a function, a system in the brain, is a threat system. It becomes overactive. It senses what is happening. Now, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, shuts down. So, let me even further complicate that. It's that prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, the operational system. The prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until around age 25 to 26. Just think about what's happening. that part of the brain is not fully developed. Many of these children are in their teens, 13, 14, 15, some even less. But the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, shuts down. Even with this developmental component, it shuts down. Now, we ask, if you ask a child afterwards, oh, why didn't you think before you act? Why didn't you think about what you're going to do? The answer is very simple. That aspect of the brain was offline. It wasn't accessible. The child was not choosing violence. The child was in survival mode, because that's what the amygdala does. Fight, flight, or freeze. So brain function dictates how the child operates, what the behavior will be. In the survival mode, reason loses to instinct, and instinct kicks in. So that all of these things that you see around us, you hear around us, just think about the kind of society that we have evolved over the past couple of years. Our music, much of our music is violent. The behaviors you see from your peers, the behavior from your parents and those around you. A lot of Jamaicans still believe in this thing called corporal punishment, meaning that if there's a problem, you're gonna beat out the child. I've always said that there are some interesting issues with corporal punishment that one needs to be aware of, how it actually works. Now, when you are subjected to corporal punishment as a child, as I was, you grew up with one of two outcomes. Either you now pass this on as you grow up to your children, or, as in my case, I have never hit my child, never hit my children, because I decided I would never want to subject them to what I experienced. And as a psychologist, I understand even more so. There are a couple of things that children learn as a part of the byproduct of experiencing corporal punishment. One thing they learn is that if somebody makes you angry, you can hit them. Somebody upset you, you can hit them. If you're bigger than somebody, you can hit them. If somebody frustrates you, you can hit them. If somebody disappoints you, you can hit them. So that becomes almost a default component. What you can use, when you can use it, and violence. Now, interestingly, there are two components many times between, differentially between girls and boys, in that what girls tend to learn first is verbal and emotional violence. By about age 5, girls learn the magic of malice. Come when not talk to her. We could stop talking to that one day. Now, the issue is that boys, because bigger muscles, more physical, boys' manifestation of violence tend to be physical. Fists and ultimately weapons. And in our culture, if a boy was to get into a tracing match with a girl, we call him names. And even if he got into a tracing match now with words with another man, we call names. And we do have a number of words and expressions in our culture that automatically connotes violence. and the response, the reaction, once somebody called you these. We should probably do a program at some point what I saw the origins of these words as to why these words have come to, take on these kinds of stimulus. But we can do that another time. But I'm just setting the tone, for what is happening, what happens in the whole case of when children experience these things and what happens from the brain and the cultural context. All right, let's be honest now. This is not just a school problem. This is a system problem. The big system of the culture, of the nation, of the people, of the community. Why do you say that? By the time the child actually becomes violent, a number of other things have happened. The family system has to a large extent failed. The family system has failed to regulate emotions. Emotions are real, emotions are there, they're at work, they're bubbling up, they're moving, but emotions have actually failed. Because we don't do very well at regulating emotions. We don't. Another component, by the time it gets to this stage, the community systems has normalized aggression. There are parents who actually tell children, anybody do anything, do them back. We encourage it, and we see it all around us every single day. We don't see the whole issue of settling disputes amicably, talking it out, and no, the community system normalize it. We can go further. The society has modeled conflict without resolution. Think about how many communities have ongoing dispute almost across generations. Think about even how many families have disputes across generations. What member of the family not talk to what member of the family, and who don't talk to who, and who going to do who what. And the school is left to absorb the consequences of all of this. Because children come there with this. And this is what they're modeling in terms of how they have learned to deal with anger, to deal with frustration, and the absence of learning adequate means for diffusing anger and frustration and resolving conflicts. So what happens by the time we get to school now? We are now asking teachers, we're putting it on them, to solve problems that they did not create. That's not fair. That's not effective. One of the problems I've noted, I have a long history of dealing with children and child development. Let me even share with you. My dissertation, I looked at development of identity in children, more specifically gender identity. How did you come to the awareness that what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl? And then now you interact this now with your racial identity. What is it? What and when do you learn to be what it means to be a black boy or a black girl? And look at the cognitive underpinnings. How is your cognitive development associated and mitigates this process? So that's where I started. That's what I did for my dissertation, and it was a fascinating study in terms of how. Now, my first, call it major position in academia was, I was assistant professor at Cornell University in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. And one of the courses I taught was child development, more specifically, Black child development. I wanted to treat our children as a primary population, not in comparison to others, no, as a understanding us. And the course was a tremendous success. In fact, I think it was on the strength of that course that I earned the Distinguished Teacher Award. I was identified as the best teacher in Cornell. My next stint was I resigned from Cornell and moved back to Jamaica to a post at the University of the West Indies. And this post was Research Fellow in Child Development. I was responsible for child development across the Caribbean. So the result, I did a number of studies. Always. One of the classic studies I did, I looked at what are the factors impacting children in school. And I looked at the comparisons between parental income, parental education, the level of stimulation provided by the environment. And I looked at children, big study, 2,500 children, Jamaica, Antigua, Barbados, and Trinidad. And the interesting thing that came out of this, the most powerful factor that impacted children's performance was not parent education or parent income or the level of stimulation, but parents' attitude to education. Parents' attitude to education. So parents who valued education, children performed much better than parents who literally just, I talk about the goat kid model. You let your children in the morning like you let a goat kid, and then go out and forage for themselves, and then they come back home, hopefully. You don't even check the homework and all of that. No, parents. So now, many times, children arrive at school inadequately socialized. So much of what should have happened at home did not. So you find that a lot of teachers' work is about the inadequate socialization. So you can imagine now the pedagogic, the teaching and learning process get a beat many times. So that's what we're grappling with in terms of how that process works and doesn't work. So what do we know about this? Now, but to start with the foundation, the family. My observation is very straightforward in how this works. The home is the first school. All the things happening in the home, that's the schoolroom that shapes the child's understanding, emotional development, social development. The home is the first school. Then we can expand on that. The parents are the first teachers. And much of the teaching is done by what parents do and what parents don't do. So children are seeing how do parents settle conflict? How do parents deal with dispute? And much of this is without even what they say. But then when you add what they say, plus in terms of what they actually do, a lot of stimulation. So home, the first school, parents, the first teachers, everything after is extra lesson. So that the foundation is set by home and parents. Whether by active design or by default, it is set. That's the reality. Families must become the first school of emotional intelligence. How do we then get this into that first school? What do we do to raise the whole process for parents in terms of their ability to assist the emotional development of their children? Here's where we must start. Teach emotional language. Help children to mitigate what you do with emotions. Children must learn to say, I am angry. I am frustrated. I feel hurt. If they cannot name it, they will act it. So oftentimes, once the child is able to express it and you teach the child what it means. Now, anger does not excuse violence, but it can elicit it. But you literally have to find a way to start helping the child to learn these interconnected pieces and what to do about it. Anger, frustration, hurt. If they can't name it, then they'll have to act it. That becomes critical in terms of what the home does. Next, we have to model emotional control. Children do not learn from what we say. You say one thing, it is my feeling, because we have 2 ears, thing enter through one ear and go out through the other. So what you say oftentimes is not what makes the impact on the child. What makes the greater impact? Children learn from what we do. That's constant. That's happening all around them. So if conflict at home is loud, children are going to be loud. If conflict at home is aggressive, the way we talk to each other, the way we express even terms of endearment, children are going to be aggressive. If conflict at home stays unresolved and people carry feelings on and on and on and on for days, for weeks, for months, for years, across generation, then learn that's what you do with conflict. And guess what? It bubbles up. And it bubbles up and it boils up, and then it gets into a situation whereby, there's a say in a pressure bus pipe. So eventually it boils over. And especially now, the child not knowing what to do with it. So the child has experienced and will experience all of these emotions. Things will trigger the frustration and the anger and the stress and the conflict. But then, based on what the child has observed, how you deal with it? And they're going to mimic that. So that becomes their template. So that first we have to find a way now. And I've been saying this for years, What do we get into the context of home and parents? Because look, parenting, I think parenting is the single most important human activity. But guess what? You don't require a license. You don't require any permit. All it takes is a fertile male and a fertile female, and the result is a child. And my interpretation, my understanding is that my estimate is that at least 75% of our children were not planned for, were not here by design, where two persons build a life together, worked out their differences, and here's how we're going to move forward as a family. And then at a point, you make a decision. Listen, I would like for us to extend the family between just me and you and to bring a child into it. If I'm wrong, you send me a note and correcting this. my family, my understanding, my observation is that what it is that the first phrase that mentions the possibility of a child coming into the world is a woman saying to a man, Mr. Period, you know. And the man now said, where tell me that for? And the argument start. Remember I said 75% because the other side, 25%, where that's a moment of joy. But then for many times now the anxiety extinguishes. And so we have to look at some of these basics. I remember one of my most painful observation, you know, I was in Kingston at the Papine market and I saw a woman. A woman, let's call her a girl, not more than looking like about 16, 17. And she was coming up from the university hospital with what looked to be a newborn baby in one hand and a bag in the other hand. And she was walking up from the hospital, coming through the gate to come up to Papine to get a bus to go home. And I thought, was my goodness, where is the male who impregnated her? Who the other half that made that possible? Why couldn't he come to meet her at the hospital? And I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who literally was there for the birth of all my children. So I'm not just talking for talk's sake, where I structured my life in such a way that I could be there and see the child immediately and be a part of that process. It's a very big different thing, you know, than somebody leaving a hospital by themselves, walking to get a bus to get home. It starts off rough, and that's not an unusual situation. I tell you one step further, every single one of my children, we had naming ceremonies for them. Naming ceremonies. In the African tradition and in the naming ceremony, I stood before members of my community and acknowledged and admire that. And every naming ceremony, there's a song I play about Marley, So Jassy. You all know that song? Not one that I see shall sit at the sidewalk and beg your bread. So I'm just speaking from my perspective. I'm sure other people have other versions of what they do, but it starts like that. Just imagine the meaning of that when a child starts off like that and comes into a family wanted. Now, if it ever starts that way, all right, more reasons for us to correct it now and catch up. Because home is the first school. Parents are the first teachers. So by the time children from my household now gets out into the other world, where the extra lessons start to kick in, they have a frame of reference to work with. So that's where it starts. Now, we need to create safe conversations with our children. Every child should have at least one space where they can say, this is what I feel, without fear. Where they can express their fears. They can express what they're feeling and talk it out. Talk it out. First, I want that to be the home. But listen, between me and you, we know sitting in Augusta most of the time. Most children can't express their feelings to their parents. Because remember, some of the parents may tell, but nobody never tell me that, you know. Never have nobody to deal with my feelings, so you better figure it out. Children need to be able to express what they feel and do so without fear. Now, if children are going through all of these feelings and these confusions, and it's going on for weeks, and months and years, it accumulates. So it is absolutely important. So starting at home, children must be able to have safe conversations. And that's why when you spend time with your children, they must feel free to be able to talk about anything. I remember a classic case, one of my younger son, he's now a man. I remember when iPods first came out, and people would have their music on their iPods. Some of you, the younger one, will have the idea what we're talking about. But it's a device that you could store a lot of music on. Is about the size, or it's actually smaller than the average cell phone now. And I remember we used to have a situation where we go on long trips. You could put a docking station in your car where you just put in your iPod. And then the music from the iPod plays through the sound system in the car. And it's a trip from Kingston to Montego Bay. And this was before highway time, so it was a longer trip than usual, And I told my son, tell you what, you play music for us for the first hour of the trip. And he said, but Dad, my music, you're not going to like my music, I said, no. I want to hear your music that you're listening to. And he reluctantly put it in the docking station. And when the first song came on, I winced. And my wife was about to take it out and tell him turn it off. That's what I know, I leave it alone. And we suffered through it, We allowed ourselves to. And after the hour, I said to my son, that the behaviors that were expressed in that music segment that you played, if anyone was to carry out those behaviors, I count a couple of hundreds of years in prison. Couple of hundreds of years in prison. But that is just music. No. What goes into you, you metabolize. You transform. And you hear this on and on and on. It becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of your world. Now, in contrast, what about all the children who are hearing those same music, but there's no parent to do what I did? To talk back to my son and say, listen, man, you can't do that. That is totally unacceptable. If all I have is your friend pneumonia boost you up and tell you, yeah, man. And the music, because anything you put to a rhythm, it is much more accessible and much more enjoyable. So children need to be able to get clarity. Just imagine how many of our children, what proportion, they get the stimulation of the negative energy and the violence and the anger and the aggression being fed via the music. Then, in terms of their company, there are many times, when I'm on the road and I see even adults, I see some adult men talking and a true word and thing, and many times we buy out the argument. Somebody, as a wiser head, I intervene as a boss. You can't do that. That don't make sense. All right? So that's where I start the process. Suggest that it is important that your children be able to modulate. So I'm showing you where the roots of the violence and the roots of the problem. So by the time the child get to school, all of what has been bubbling up and so on. Okay, now let's talk about the school now. The child goes to school. Inadequately socialized, and the teacher, the teaching staff, we have deans of disciplines and all of these things are totally frustrated. You hear the verbal anger, the emotional anger, and then the physical. Sometimes it starts out right in the classroom. Sometimes it happens on the school compound. Sometimes the threats are, wait till me catch you out the road. So it now shifts to a disciplinary problem, disciplinary regulation. That's what the school now has to deal with. Discipline asks, how do I control this child? How do I control this child? In contrast, regulation asks, how do I stabilize this child? Because the behavior needs stabilization. Things need to happen to help that child to become stable, to learn how to cope with negative energy, emotion, frustration, anxiety, fears. But remember what I said up front. The prefrontal cortex is far from being developed, so that internal control mechanism of the child ultimately will develop is not there. So it's now the school has an immediate problem to deal with, and that has to be dealt with right then and there. So that becomes a how do we discipline the child? How do we discipline the child? Now, I had a program many years ago which I had shared with the Ministry of Education. And it was built around this idea that my observation that in most schools, there were at least 12 boys, especially the boys' school. Now, I'm sure the same thing in the girls' school, that were in the departure lounge. Meaning, on the verge of being expelled. Because remember at school, you have disciplinary action that scales. Some school give, you have to write lines. Some schools, your detention, you're staying after. And there's, creative expression. Then at another level, you have suspension. And the length of the suspension is a function of the severity of the behavior. And ultimately, you have expulsion. So when I say boys were in the departure lounge, in that schools were actively now considering, no, we have to part company with this child. This child is too disruptive. And the initial response from the Ministry of Education at that time when I suggested it is that they don't have any budget for this. My response was very simple. If you don't find a budget for this out of the Ministry of Education budget, what you will do is now transfer the problem to the Ministry of Security. Ministry of Security. Because it becomes another level problem. And you transfer it plus GCT. It would have grown significantly by then. Subsequently, they decided to do a couple of pilots. And we had a couple of schools in the corporate area that I piloted. Kingston College, Jamaica College, St. George's, Holy Trinity, Mona, in some clusters. And what I find interesting, in that years later, we're talking about over 20 years ago where we had this pilot, but then they never found it. I run into young men who are part of that program who life totally different now, totally different. So the whole notion of what you say to a child. I remember some months ago, I was invited to Hilltop Juvenile Facility to speak to some boys there, you know? And there's a line I always wanted to use. Now that I have your attention, because I'm not going nowhere for a while. Many of them are there because of various infractions that they have committed. But I'm saying that we need to be able to do things like that. Now, teachers must be prepared and trained to do emotional de-escalation. How do we de-escalate the problem? Now, the pedagogic, the teach and learning component are important, but it's now given the nature of our society, teachers become psychological first responders. They're the one that will see these unsocialized, under-socialized children, and they have to deal with it. So teachers have to be trained. Skills needed: tone control, body language awareness, de-escalation techniques. Because how you address the problem, how you address the child, you can add fuel to the flames or you can reduce it. It has to be a significant part of the teacher's preparation now. Body language, de-escalation techniques. It's also important that schools create a calm space, not just a punishment space. I have seen studies where schools, I'm not aware of any in Jamaica, have a place called a reset room. A reset place you go. It's like a meditation center. A meditation center with the lights and the acoustics and the comfort to induce you going inside. I remember one study I did many years ago, when I visited all the children's homes in Jamaica, all of them. And I rated them in terms of their end product. And in my study, Alpha in Kingston was the number one. And I spoke with the sister, asked her, what do you attribute your capacity to, how you transform? Because many of these boys that come into you have all kinds of problems. And she mentioned that she had a room there. I'm not sure what she called it, but it's what I'm calling a reset room. She said when a boy comes in and there host of problems, she has him spend a day in the room. And he has to, think about what was his life like before he came to Alpha. What has his life been like since he has been there? And what will his life be like if you should be asked to leave now? And the boy is to think about that for one day and be prepared to discuss. And she says, inevitably, there are some boys who have to be given extra time because they haven't really made the effort to think through and articulate, and then they have the conversation. And that's when all the things start to come out as to what got you here and what are the trigger mechanisms that are causing you to behave in a particular way. And inevitably, most times, she was able to transform the boys from spending time in the reset room. That's what it is. It's not for punishment, it's for regulation, for the child to deregulate, reset the system. So that's what we're talking about. So we have to go even wider now. Society. Jamaica has become a tough, of course. We talk about the warmth of Jamaicans and all that we have on television and so on. Yes, we can be very warm people, but we can be some coarse people. We have to go wider now. And what is happening in our broader society? What are we modeling? What are the examples that we set? If children see violence as power, aggression as respect, conflict without resolution, they internalize this. As I say, this one of the first thing come to mind is the fact that now Parliament is being televised. When we see the level of disrespect expressed among our politicians, when we hear comments that they make to those on the other side, we talked about the music already. So that how do we get more pro-social examples into the lives of our children? If all children are seen as violence as power, aggression as respect, and conflict without resolution, they will copy it. This is what they will now internalize and become the template that they use. What about media? Remember I talked about, extra lesson? Media is one of the most powerful teachers. What we glorify, we multiply. We need more stories of resolution. We need more stories of emotional strength, less normalization of chaos. And here's the problem now with that. In one sense, our media options are totally deregulated. In addition, there's a time in Jamaica, if we go back far enough, all we had was one television station, and that was it. And then we would multiply, now we had video and DVD, and you could rent movies and so on. But then now, it's a whole different world now, because we have cable. And cable provide unrestricted access to all types of behavior. Then now we're going beyond cable now, we have YouTube. We have podcasts, we have TikTok, and many children have access to smartphones. And many parents do not regulate what children consume on their phones. So that it's even more imperative that we be able to give children tools to interpret and to work with. You realize how much we're not doing. But it is my belief that we can provide mechanism now to use these same avenues, media, to provide input to counter the behaviors that we're seeing. We need stories of resolution, models of emotional strength, and less normalization of chaos. If you notice what happened, how come I saw so many of those videos? Because we naturally, that's what we share. That's what we send around. I, as a person, once somebody sends it to me, most times I don't even look at it. Once I see what it is, I delete it. I'm not going to pass it on to anybody else. I'm not going to continue, because that's how we impact others. So what I do, I see what it's saying, I shake my head, I delete. So this is where we are, folks. This is where we are. So just treating the problem at the end stage, we have to start working back through the system. Hmm? We need to use media in a more creative way. What about it within each school? Start with the children and their peers. If we're going to work back through the system, whereby, and I've actually done this, with groups of young people, have them work out a skit for conflict resolution, work out a skit. And the first part of the skit, you show how the problem developed and what happened and so on. And then you work out alternative endings and so on, how else it could happen, how else you could resolve it. Part of my work, many times, I'm called into companies or even communities to deal with disputes. And there's a technique that I've used successfully. I call it replay. I remember once there was a situation in this organization where there's a conflict between two men, and it was escalating, it was going bigger and bigger, to the point where at one point police were called in because of the kind of language and the behaviors and the threats that were being sent back and forth between these men. And the organization was fearful that this could become toxic, become worse. And my technique, it worked dramatically. I met with each man separately, and I had him explain to me now, okay, what happened? From your perspective, what happened? How it got to this? Where it started? And he'd go right through, and I listened to details right through. And then I asked him to, all right, I want you to go back through what you just told me. And as if you were playing back a tape. And I'd like for you to stop it at the point where if you had done something differently, it would not have escalated to where it is today. And with some reluctance, I mean, he did it, and all right, I noted it, and we talked about ways of resolving things, and we talked in general and so on, and finished the session. When I met with the other party, same thing, and I had him do the same thing. Go over the whole incidents, what happened, step by step by step, listen, hear him out, and I asked him to do the same thing. For you to now play it back for me now like a tape, and I'd like for you to stop the tape at the point where if you had done something differently, the outcome would have been different. Folks, guess what? Both men stopped the tape at the same point. Both men on their own realized that if each had done something just differently, the outcome would have been different. So I said, my goodness. So I went to the HR manager and said, I think we can get this one. And I've done that a couple of times. Then I brought the men together. Unwilling, of course, at first. And then I told each one what the other had said. That if he had done something differently at that point, X, outcome would have been different. And it was the same thing the other one had said. Now, folks, all right, now we are at the point. Let's find a way to go forward now. We were able to. So this is just one approach, folks, and we have to start working through this process. I want to leave you with this. School violence is not just children becoming dangerous. It is children becoming unheard. And when a society cannot hear its children, eventually what happens? They will feel. If you can't hear, you will feel. So tonight, I invite you to shift the question, not what is wrong with the children, but what are they trying to tell us that we're refusing to hear? I'm Dr. Leahcim Semaj reminding you, the MindSpa says calm over chaos, clarity over noise. Thank you for spending time. Good night.